Somewhere in the middle of the two extremes lies a world of open discourse. Probing the depths of the in-between. Welcome to Gray Matters Radio with your host, Michael DeVine.
Good Friday afternoon, everybody. Michael DeVine here with Gray Matters Radio, and I'm here for another installment. What's actually kind of exciting about this one, this is like our first kind of follow-up throughout the week, where obviously a lot of news have happened. And an election kind of happened, and in case you haven't realized it, it's gotten a little crazy kind of out there. It was kind of a really interesting kind of result. It was almost kind of comical watching the results basically come in. It was funny. I was kind of calling it. I was like, all right, here's what's going to happen. The Democrats obviously got the House, in case, you really haven't been paying attention to anything. But I'm sure if you're listening to this show, you probably have been picking up on something. So Democrats won the House, Senate, the Republicans won the Senate. And it was funny because I was like, all right, so here's what's going to happen. So Democrats are basically going to declare this a giant kind of victory. And the Republicans are basically going to declare a victory. So you're going to have two groups declaring victory. And sure as shit, that's exactly what happened. Democrats almost like it's almost like they kind of forgot that they didn't win the Senate and they actually lost more seats. This is like a mandate. This is the progressives are the thing that won, this election. And then the Republicans basically came in as showing that, obviously this shows that because the Senate is really what kind of matters, and that we actually gain more seats. And so this is really more about everyone showing that, hey, they really are kind of believing in Trump and what the Republicans are doing. And so it's like, how in the hell do you have two completely different viewpoints, basically of a reality of an election? So once again, I'm joined by Domenic Flash Gordon over there. Dom, you with me?
I'm with you here, Mike.
All right, then of course, for something as important as this, I had to bring my father back into this. My dad is basically the guy. This guy knows more about history than anything. Guy has taught history. He's a teacher. Worked in business many years. This guy knows everything about everything. Dad, you there? The professor.
Yeah, I'm here.
Welcome to the show, Dad.
Yeah, oh, gosh.
All right.
So is anybody else is it just me? Or did anyone else find the commentary by the Democrats and Republicans absolutely hilarious about these results? I don't know. Dad, when you were listening to everyone declaring victory, what really is, are you finding as funny as I am that each side's declaring victory?
No, not really. I think each side, in their own way, actually do look at as some victory. Again, the country, it did display a country very divided. From both race to sex to regions to educational backgrounds, whether they're urban, suburbans, or rural country. The country is totally divided down, I think each one is trying, the Democrats can look at the House as being a victory, but what happened in the Senate, but now they're already jockeying around for 2020, in which a majority, there's a very large segment of Republican senators that are going to have to come up for re-election that are in blue states. So the same thing that happened to the Democrats, where you had a large portion of Democrats coming up in red states from 2016 red Trump states, or now the Republicans are going to face the same thing in 2020. So I think what you're just seeing is political parties trying to put a positive slant on each thing, and each one is going to have to prepare for 2020.
Well, that's like the
it's probably the most significant midterm ever out there,
agree.
Because you had a very, very large voter turnout. One, Two then being the Democrats have increased from 2016 the popular vote, which now means you've got millennials coming out. You've got more women going to the areas. You've got a lot more of the minorities going into the voting, and they're now becoming politically active. So if anything, that's probably scaring a little bit of the Republicans to where, their segment could be getting older. It's strictly into the rural. So I think they're all sitting there going back, what's really going to go on? So let's keep this positive.
And well, that's where.
But I think the House was big. I think for the Democrats.
You can't mail it. What was it? How many? What was like a 35 place swing or something like that? It was a big ass swing.
It depends. The number of seats depends on what each day when you turn on the TV.
Oh yeah,
because the recounts are still coming up. I think the last number I heard was about 41. There's a possibility, and a lot of it is dealing in areas that were traditional Republican.
Well, I mean, when was the last time?
Especially.
Well, think about when was the last time this many people for midterm? I mean, Dom, did you do early voting or did you vote straight up that day?
Oh, no, I voted live time, sure.
I mean, think about how many people were there. I mean, when was the last? I mean, have you voted in every midterm, or was this the first midterm or non-presidential you voted in a while?
Oh no, I've always exercised my right to vote. I mean, I don't see any reason not to.
This was one. It was funny because, I try to think the last time I literally went early to make sure that I'm going to go, I'm going to vote. Because usually in the presidential, the ones that I always really hit. And then I would say most of the time I probably voted in the midterms. But there were just some years where it was just like, all right, damn it,
I guess it's always been so easy for me. My polling station is literally a half a block from my house that I would drive by no matter what several times that day. So not pulling in to exercise my right to vote just kind of seems a little, un-American at that point that I physically go by it and still choose not to. So,
But the thing is, I will give Ohio mad props. Because being in Texas for so long, it didn't matter. It was early voting. It didn't matter. It was voting day. It didn't matter if it was midterms. There was always literally an hour and a half, 2 hour wait. You would literally drive up there and there'd be a line coming out of the polling station. And then the shittiest thing about it would then the lobbyist or the campaign volunteers for the candidates, they would literally sit there and try to talk with you in the parking lot because they were allowed to do that. Well, and so it's you couldn't even sit there for an hour and not be bombarded with people trying to challenge who you're voting for. But in Ohio, literally everyone I've talked to, even with my early voting, it was in and out. I literally voted in 10 minutes. So I'm going to give Ohio mad props right off the bat. They're for a state that, we have a lot. We have a decent amount of budgets and everything for the state, but they did everything right. So I think that was awesome. But yeah, it was the first time I really made an effort to kind of go out and really made sure I was going to get out there because there was this sense of this was one of the most important elections. Not even just in non-presidential. To me, it was very much about this country.
Well, and also on the state levels alone, too. There was a lot of governorships.
Yeah.
And the Democrats, for the past several election cycles, from 2008 to 2010, you saw, the Democrats lose a lot of governorships and a lot of the state legislatures and local governments. And we have a national census coming up. And the party in power in the governors is very important. And that's where you saw a lot of key Democrats win in traditional Republican states. And that is going to be very important because some of the areas in Reeves has been the gerrymandering issue where a lot of your Republican governors, Republicans were winning big seats and the Democrats were just losing there. And that allowed the legislature to gerrymander their locations to put it in favor of Republican districts.
And that was even more powerful because the House, isn't the House the most
Yes.
sensitive. And think about that. With everything being gerrymandered.
Well, the House is all. Yeah,
well, when was the last
that's
time the
your
Democrats
district.
had control of Congress? Was it during Bush?
No, they were. No, they.
Oh
They
no,
had their
Obama.
Nancy
Obama's
Pelosi
first
with
term.
them.
That's right. He had.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
So think about
Then he had
that
the
even
big
for a
night.
second.
Then came the midterm in 2010, which changed the House around. So yeah, and there's been a lot of challenges in the courts where the states. There's been a lot of challenges to the gerrymandering, and the courts have been forcing some of the states to redistrict.
There's been a lot of that. You see, a lot of the state
gerrymandering.
Supreme Courts have had to.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're getting ridiculous with it. Where even it was interesting.
Well,
There was a
it's
couple
very
cases.
blatant.
Yeah, I think it was in
It
Texas.
was very blatant, and now,
Yeah.
now you got a lot of Democratic governors going to be replacing the Republican, and so that's going to be starting a whole new area where there's going to be a lot of issues to where you're going to see a lot of these districts really changing around.
Like, hey Dom,
especially with the census coming up.
Well, and that's where it's interesting because, and Dom, I got a question for you. So,
Sure.
it was funny when we were kind of talking before the show, and this was one of those where, the reason, I really love having Dom on the show because, one, I mean, there's a lot of things that he really has strong opinions about and has a great base of knowledge. But this show was really interesting because it's kind of like the wrap up from the news. And I remember telling him, hey, this is what I want to kind of go over and talk about. So you're like, dude, what the hell do I know about that? But I was like, well, but you're just you have an opinion of I'm just a regular guy, man. I don't have this academic knowledge of it, but you have an opinion, and it's the whole point of this show is to give a voice to the people that are just the regular people. Too long, you have people that are in the media basically saying this is what the voters are thinking. You have these experts, this is what the voters are thinking. You have politicians basically saying, well, no, this is really what's happening, but the people are telling something different. And so, I think the whole idea of the show is giving a mouthpiece to the regular folks. Just like we had on Monday when we were talking to an illegal immigrant, the person that would never, ever have a mouthpiece to say what their opinion is. That's what this show is about. And, so you hear me and my dad. Now, me and my dad, we've always, poli-sci was my minor in undergrad. So to me, politics to me is like watching football. It's like free agency basically right now in the draft. But
that's a great metaphor, Mike.
it is. To me, it's like, oh, dude, what's going to happen? How are they going to fit into this scheme? And, but so me and my dad obviously are like, dude, this was a really big election, but okay, we're the guys that will be are wonkish on this stuff. But all right, Joe Everyman, Flash. What do you think? Did you view it the same way? Did you have even a feeling of, okay, this is different than the other elections that I've been in?
Oh, well, absolutely. Just something as simple as having conversations with my wife prior to the election and seeing her interest in wanting to vote.
I know Lisa was
somebody who's traditionally doesn't even have any care in the world in regards to that kind of stuff, but actually taking some time to do some research and some education on some of the issues that, were on ballot here in Ohio. Just seeing that change and Professor D, you brought up that point as well, that, voting was high this time around for midterm elections. And I feel like that's a positive change because of the fact that it was such a controversial presidential election. I feel like it's kind of, put some life back into our political system, and traditionally, I guess segments of the population that may not vote and may not care, that if it's going to start, encouraging that, not only encouraging voting, but with the ability for us now with all our wonderful technology to actually get information and be informed a little bit more on what we're voting for. Something as simple as one of the issues that we voted on here, through our research, we found out that the way it was worded, voting yes really meant no, and voting no really meant yes. But the way that the was structured, it was so confusing to the public that had Lisa and I not done that research, we might have voted the wrong way. That didn't really actually reflect what we wanted our vote to count for. So something like that was really interesting to me.
And I think that.
Well, I think you could take a look at is that if you take a look at what the House, when it comes in, it's historical, in which you're going to have over 25. I think it's about 120, 100 to 120. I can't remember the exact number. Are going to be women. That's the highest it's ever been.
They're younger,
and I think that's just reflective. I think that is very reflective of where the how you want to put it is the actions, the sayings of Trump, from his not just on the lies, but the misogyny, to everything, is you saw this women backlash to where you saw the Democrats put up some fantastic candidates in women and also in some younger people that, it's a different face that of the Democratic Party that's going to be going into the House. And and it's people that the suburbs, the areas, you saw the rebellion, maybe not in the Senate so much, but that's a different part. But in the House of the people, that was the change that you're starting to see. And again, I'm not an expert or whatever, but I think you're beginning to see the as I always called it, there's an evolution to a revolution. I think we saw a revolution beginning in politics. And, and if I think there's going to be held in accountability from both Democrats, Republicans, and everything. It's a change. They're very informed, the populace, and now they're starting to exercise that power.
And that,
my wife was very into it. She kept asking me questions, and she couldn't wait to go to the polls to vote.
That is so think about what you guys just said. So it's interesting that I think a lot of times people think the electorate is just really uninformed, that they really just don't understand these issues, and that they vote blindly. Now, the thing is, it's interesting. I mean, and Dom, we were talking about this a little bit even off the air, but that the thing about Ohio, and the thing I love about Ohio, actually one of the big reasons why I wanted to move my family from Texas back up here to Ohio was literally because we're very educated voters here, and we're not just blindly, believing something. You have to really earn our votes. There's a reason why we're the bellwether state. There's a reason why, depending on the candidate or the candidates, we'll go one way or the other. And I think what we're kind of seeing, we all grew up here, right? And even the Midwestern kind of ideal of people are doing their research. But I think we always saw that with Ohio, that we had to have real discussions. But there was a technical level of research and trying to get an understanding of issues and candidates I've never seen before. Dom, you're saying Lisa was asking all these questions. She was texting me, hey, look at this. Hey, what about this? Mom was really, really, really involved. I remember there was an issue, I think it was issue 1, where it was talking about reduced drug penalties.
Yep, that's what I was referring to.
And literally there were so many people that read it. Like, I'm talking legitimately read the damn thing while they were voting, and they felt uncomfortable voting for it because it wasn't 100% clear. And it was crazy to me. And that's where I was like, okay, was this then going on throughout the rest of the country? And I almost want to say yes, because, and this is where, and Dad, I'm really curious to get your opinion on this one, because once again, there's a reason why I'm calling you the professor, because you know a lot about the history of how elections have gone. And the thing I'm trying to understand, and it hasn't quite made sense to me, especially, sure, shit, listening to the media, I'm not understanding it. But so think about all the gerrymandering. The Democrats were able to get enough people out to overcome all the gerrymandering, get a bunch of new people into the process of voting. And then that's even then combined with Republicans getting a lot of their voter activation out there. And they were able to overcome to get the House back, right? But then in the very same breath, if you look at a lot of these state-by-state little breakdowns, there was like a lot of, well, one Republican won, then one Democrat would win. And then the House went largely in one direction, but then the Democrats, it looked like they lost seats in the Senate. What does that mean? Because to me, it's so important for us to understand, because if the leadership at each side don't really understand the results of this election, they're going to choose ways of behaving for over the next 2 years in a run-up to the 2020 election that are based upon that false knowledge. And I don't know, what does it mean? I don't understand how it could go so far in one direction and then lose in another. I mean, has this happened before? Is this something new?
No, I don't think it's new, but there was always the silent majority that, Ronald Reagan, his election with the silent majority, you hear the term called the Reagan Democrats, the independents. And I think what you saw in 2018 was the beginning of a altogether revolution, to where I think what we're seeing is the polarization really of America, of the United States. I think we're really starting to see it, that there's so many variables, but I think the biggest thing that we're starting to see again, which is, I think, great, is the people are starting to come back and realize the power of the vote. And that goes from both Democrats to independents to Republicans, is what we saw in the House of Representatives voting. We saw a lot of traditional to where people could still be Republicans, but they were voting for Democratic candidates, because of the backlash from not liking Trump. Or basically, if Trump kept saying he made the elected midterm a referendum on himself, is basically people were going to the polls, for various reasons, and then just saying, I'm voting against Trump because there's issues. So in one way, he stimulated his base, but in another way, he stimulated the people into which there was a reaction going on, and especially with, as I said, it was by regions, suburban. They were looking very closely from the immigration. Healthcare was coming out there very big. People concerned with pre-existing conditions. We heard all the talk up to the day of the election on, people were saying, well, if you vote Republican, we're going to go after healthcare. Well, from the time that Obama got Obamacare, the Republicans have been trying to get rid of it. They stripped the pre-existing. These are things that people were beginning to start looking at, the immigration part, and they started to reject it and started voting down in a retaliatory area. So I think politicians are going to have to be very much aware of what they say, what they do, and it's going to hold accountability to both houses now and to the presidency, saying, hey, there is consequence to everything.
Well, that's right. When you look at how educated
and
people
that
are.
Vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, take a look at the people that got nailed. There were some very big incumbents.
It was an
anti-incumbent
people election.
That were, and if you take a look at Florida, it's still not decided. You had Gillum come in, a nobody, who won surprisingly a midterm, ran for governor, and now they're going into You had Beto O'Rourke, who for a while there was nip and tuck with Cruz.
It was only 2 points, I think, the final count he lost.
I'm just sitting there going, saying, to me, this is what American democracy and voting is supposed to be. And I think some of us began to realize that by sitting back and not voting, we were allowing things to go on. In other words, I was at the polls and we were talking to another older couple, and we were just waiting in line. And, the poll person told us they had already seen 1,200 people, and we were only at 2:00. And he said, the last midterm, that was the whole day. he said they've been swamped. And one of the guys we were talking, I said, you know what? I think we've all woken up. That we allowed ourselves to go to sleep and be hoodwinked, you know, and now it's you've woken a sleeping tiger, basically. And the tiger, you know, what you've awoken is American conscience and the vote. And I think the younger people, from the women to the suburbs now, the issues are going to have to be addressed, you know, and hopefully this is going to start taking the, how you want to put it, is going to start taking the special interest groups out of the decision making, because you're going to have to be very cognizant of how your constituents are thinking and how the nation is thinking before you start making those decisions.
So this revolution you talk about, that is almost a revolution in the voters, the public, ourselves becoming not only involved but also educating. So now some of these folks in Washington and all the, you know, various branches are actually going to have accountability.
Yeah.
Well, Don,
that's what the Constitution is, checks and balances.
Well, Don,
and so you feel for a long time that was out of balance, is what you're saying. The checks and balances weren't there with us as the voting public.
Yeah. You got to vote to have it work. I mean, if you don't vote, things like what happens is going to happen, you know, is going to get passed without you knowing it. And I think for seniors, myself and all that, when we started hearing Social Security, Medicare, healthcare, wow, now you're starting to wake me up that you could have people who could really care the least, all of a sudden making decisions that could be stripping you of healthcare to where now you're going to be denied a healthcare, or Social Security could be cut or whatever. The key being is the message: go back doing what you're supposed to do. Don't sit there and say you're Republican or be a bipartisan. It should be bipartisan politics. That's what we've elected you there for. And I think this is the message is being sent out, you know. And if already they're talking about 2020 on the Senate, you know, based on what happened in the House, okay, that is telling me the Republicans do know something is changing right now, you know. And even I heard Mitch McConnell the other night talk about we've got to start working together, the Mueller and all that. So I think this was a real big awakening for everybody, you know, and maybe we can thank Trump for waking us up.
You know what's funny? That is exactly what I said was probably going to happen, is that when people are kind of really looking back on this election, and I think they would be remiss to sit there and go, well, this was about, you know, Trump, and it was like, no, you know what? I always had this theory all along, especially when the rhetoric started getting really bad, was that it because, you know, it's like people are like a frog in boiling water, I think, as a whole. And when things just kind of progressively get worse, it's like you don't realize it until it's too late. And it was going to take almost something, the volume being turned up so damn loud, to where all of a sudden people realize going, oh my God, like what the hell? It's gotten really bad. And exactly where this election was almost about that, where people started really understanding that we've allowed this to happen. That's why people were educating themselves, because it was like, okay, we've allowed ourselves to be bamboozled and hoodwinked and out of our own laziness and just trusting that, okay, no, I got your best interest. And I think people realize now, okay, no, you don't have my best interest. And if I don't allow myself to get educated on what's really going on, then I'm going to believe anything that you basically have to say. And that was the most, I think, amazing thing about this election, was that it was the first time we're seeing multiple pieces of evidence pointing to that. But in the same breath, though, it's about then going, okay, now, what does this mean for 2020 then? Because let's be honest, Trump was very much on this ballot. And Dom, you and I were talking about this even before the show about, you know, what is going to happen in 2020? And and it's like, what does this mean for the electorate? Because, you know, I always kept saying is that the Trump base will always be the Trump base. He could go out, I mean, he said himself, I could go murder somebody, my base is not going to change their opinion of me. But his base wasn't enough to get him elected. It was the fact that he had lots of independents going along with him. And Dom, you and I were talking about this before the show. Like in Columbus, we have friend groups, and this is where it's really difficult, I think, to be able to talk about politics, because we were always able. One of the very first shows that we did on Gray Matters was talking about how, like, our friend group, at least my friend group growing up, we were always able to talk politics over beers, and then all of a sudden, when the last so many years, it got so vitriolic, where people that were able to talk about things, people that were able to talk about politics, all of a sudden aren't able to talk about politics. People that literally did awful things to each other, stole money, screwed other people's girlfriends, were able to let that go. But this election made people cut each other off. And so, and that's the interesting thing with Ohio, is that we all have friend groups where we have some people are Democrats, some people are Republicans, some are hardcore one direction or the other. But then we always have that little group in the middle of independence. And Dom and I were talking a lot about how, okay, there's even been a little bit of a shift with, the reasons why people voted for Trump, the independents, and how that started shifting over time. What have you kind of noticed, Dom, just with that shifting of the why Trump got elected, where it's at now, and what that might mean for 2020 in that election?
Go ahead, Dad, please.
No, go ahead, Don. Go ahead.
No. When you think about it, I remember having conversations with folks when all that went down, and actually having conversations with folks who are way, very, very liberal Democrats who didn't go vote, but then were upset about the fact that Trump was elected president. And I remember having conversations with certain people, and they were very opinionated and very, I guess, anti-Trump. But then when it came down to it, and then they'd go the next breath and say, but, I didn't go vote, or this, that, the other. It's like, well, I think, like, as you mentioned, Dad, there's been an increase in voting. I'm not so sure that in 2020 that's going to be the same case, that the liberal millennial group, if you will, which I know that's being stereotypical, but I do feel like the younger generations are certainly a lot more liberal just in our social beliefs. And I mean, even if you look at like the election here in Ohio for governor, it was very close. Ohio went red ultimately, but if you look where all of the blue vote was, it was in all the major, population areas in Franklin County and Cuyahoga County and Hamilton County down in Cincinnati. Even Athens County, I'm looking at the map right now, was a big 62%, blue vote. So, when you're looking at these segments of the population that are now coming up and possibly getting excited about voting again and understanding the, ramifications of that, like you said, Mike, in 2020, yeah, Trump will have his, his base and his supporters, but that, not only the independent vote, but, the liberal vote that they just, I feel like that segment of my friends group just never quite understood the gravity of what it meant to vote or not vote.
I have to agree with you on there. I think that's in 2020, between now and 2020, because the sweepstakes start now. After January, you will start seeing probably 150 Democratic hopefuls.
It's
to
going to
go out
be
there
Survivor.
to who's going to be president. And I'll be very honest with you. I think if the Democrats are running a politician, it ain't going to work. Yeah. I think it's going to have to be an altogether different type of candidate. It may have to come. I just don't see it, but I really like that Beto O'Rourke. I watched a couple of his town meetings during that on CNN. I really liked him.
So, but I think Beto,
Andrew Gillum out of Florida. It's going to come from there, but the key being is we are seeing the revolution. Dom, and you just mentioned it. Traditional red states if you look at the electoral map, you are starting to see that suburban urban area growing in importance. There's more and more people that are moving traditional, even in the South. You started seeing the election of Democrats in Atlanta and Georgia, in all those areas, because the suburbs are building up. There's more women getting in. They're educated. And what's starting to happen is between now and 2020, those areas are only going to get bigger. And I think that's between the leadership of the Democrats and the Republicans. The problem's going to be with the Democrats. How do I keep this thing moving? Well, now I got to continue to have the best type of candidates that's reflective and will embrace those major areas that they want. If the Republicans are going to stay in the same mode and put up candidates that are going to be nothing more than imitation Trumps, the Republicans are going to lose. They're being rejected. So the key being is, could the Republican Party in 2020 see a very deep challenge to Trump? Could Trump be experiencing a challenge that's going to come from a more moderate Republican?
See, I have a theory that reason why Nikki
I think
Haley,
it's going to be an unbelievable.
Well, I think the reason why I have this theory that the reason Nikki Haley stepped down was that she's going to either challenge Trump or Trump ain't going to run. And this is my theory. I posted this on the Facebook. I go, I will put money on it. I will. I don't know if we're allowed running a betting ring on Facebook. It might be illegal. So if I get in trouble, I'm sorry. But I'm willing to bet $1 million if Trump pulls a Clinton, because Clinton, when Clinton lost Congress, he had two choices. Basically, just try to ram stuff through, which was never going to happen, or he basically circumvented the Democrats. He basically went, all right, well, screw it. They're not going to get anything done if we do everything that we want to do. He worked with Republicans because he was thinking about re-election and his legacy. If Trump does that, because Trump, everything about him is about saving face. And if he does that, I think for an absolute fact he is not going to run again, because now he's not thinking about his ego. He's not thinking about anything but his legacy. And I really do believe that Nikki Haley then is going to be that because that's going to be formidable. And this is where I think the biggest mistake Democrats will make. Think about what we're saying today. People are now educated. They're realizing that the reason why things are broken is because no one's working together. No one knows how to legislate. The Democrats, and this is my personal opinion, and I'll totally admit, I was an Obama guy. I thought Obama was going to be our Kennedy. I remember when Hillary was running, everyone was like this, hey, let Hillary run. She knows the process. Let Obama be the supporting guy. He'll learn the ropes. But I was like, nah, I don't like Hillary at all. I didn't like her back then. Let Obama be the guy. But the problem was, though, we elected a guy that had no legislative experience. He had no stomach for it. He couldn't get anything passed, whereas Clinton loved the fight. Beto is basically Obama redux. And if we're reading, the tea leaves, and people are sick of people are realizing that Congress really and Senate is really what makes everything roll. And a good president understands the politics of making all that work together. And I think people now they're awakened. I think you're absolutely right, Dad. Dom, people are awakened now to realizing what the problem is. And I think the Democrats, if they elect Beto or they run up against him, he might seem attractive to it, but the guy does not know how to he does not have the experience enough. You got to find some seasoned person, I think, because you elect like a Mark Cuban, like a anti-Trump, it's going to be the same damn thing. They don't know anything about politics. I mean, Trump had such a huge you have a learning curve as the president, even if you were in the Senate and the Congress. People can't make that same mistake again. But the problem is, though, the Democrats they don't have anybody. They have nobody that's a seasoned person to pair with them.
I think, what you're mentioning is that you go back to Ronald Reagan in his first years. He had to go up against a Democratic Congress. He had Tip O'Neill, very, very powerful Democratic Congress. And after trying to, go against them, and if you ever read Chris Matthews' book, is when Politics Work, is when Reagan and Tip O'Neill realized we're here to serve the American people. We're not here to serve the Republican Party. We're not here to Democrats. We were elected to serve the American people. And if we don't do this, we aren't going to be around. And those two put aside, I mean, they still had, you're still a Democrat Republican, but they put together some unbelievable legislation for the country. And I think that's, Trump could come out still a hero. If he assumes the role of breaching, in other words, I'll be like Clinton with Newt Gingrich, and I'll be like a Reagan to there, go with the Democrat. I mean, there's still a lot to do. You've got the infrastructure bills. We still have immigration to address. We still have a defense issue, with the threats that are coming from, from Russia, China, and all that. We're being challenged. We have unbelievable challenges that we have to start addressing, and we can't going in to address ourselves. So, I think the next 2 years are going to really tell it. But the worry that I have is what Democratic candidate could all of a sudden come up? I'm really having a hard time taking a look at it and saying, here's where the challenge is going to come. But can Trump change and become another Ronald Reagan? I don't know.
But you got to look at it. I mean, and
years will tell us.
But and this is where I look at. I mean, think about, all right. So the day after the election, right? So the conversation we're having right now, it's like, oh, this is real great. Maybe he can, right? But then literally the day after the election, what does the guy do? He fires Sessions and then appoints, his deputy, his lieutenant, the guy who literally was the biggest anti-Robert Mueller Russia probe guy, who literally wrote a manifesto. Like, literally, you think I'm lying? He literally wrote a manifesto of how to derail the Mueller Russia probe. And so, it's great in theory, but literally, so the day after the guy does that, and so that doesn't
I don't
exactly
think he calculated. I don't think he calculated on the reaction that's coming in. And two, you had to watch him at that press conference. The press came in and then unrailed him. I think the exchange between Costas and Trump was pretty good. Now he's lost his press credentials, so there's some unnerving going on right now.
Oh, he definitely seemed rattled.
Yeah.
But the thing is,
I would be too.
Well, you got to look. I mean, and this is where once again everything's about calculating for 2020. Is that are Democrats going to sit there and throw the kitchen sink at him, or are they going to go maybe okay, let's work together, let's see if we can. But I think everything begins and ends with if his attorney general kind of starts derailing this, and actually Dom and I had a really good conversation about this because one of the things is actually we all had a good conversation because one of the things Dad, you and I were kind of talking about. Like, so the Mueller probe's pretty much already done. I think they got to cross the dot. So, like, that information is going to get out there. What you were saying basically is the Senate has the ability basically to confirm or not confirm this guy. And then two, if they decide to basically shut this thing down, then okay, that's it. They have the ability. And I asked you, well, what if stuff is in there that does legitimately show that maybe there were some shenanigans going on? You're like, dude, it doesn't matter. They have the ability to do it. That's the power they have. That's the importance of keeping the Senate. And Dom and I, we were talking about this, and because Dom, you were saying that when you asked like a lot of your friends the reason why that they voted for Trump, people that were almost like really more Democrats or just like or left of center people that usually voted Democrat and the ones that voted Republican, the big reason you said that they voted for Hillary or they didn't vote for Hillary was because they didn't trust her. And then, and so maybe you can explain, like, what was it that they were saying about Hillary and why they didn't like her? And then you had a great interpretation of what that might mean for Trump if all this information came out that it showed he was kind of maybe shady, but he shut it down off a technicality.
Well, so I think that goes back to kind of the running theme that we've been talking about, that voters, whether, I'll start from, my age, I'm mid 40s, down to, my friends group who go down to folks in their 20s, and kind of anywhere in between that demographic right there. Um, as we get more educated about this stuff, and we're actually taking the time to understand what all this means and the importance of the vote, and the, our part in the election, I guess you could say, is that when it comes down to it, I feel like our generation, that demographic, that there are some of your staunch Republicans and some of your, quote unquote bleeding heart liberals, but I feel like the good majority of that is very much still in the middle, because of the fact that we want a fiscally responsible government, but we also want a social liberalism, on humanity as a policy. And it's like, so where does that go? So when you're looking at these two candidates, that you may say, okay, there's certain things about, the Trump campaign and his agenda that I like, but there's things about Hillary's agenda and Hillary's campaign that I like. And identifying those things in the parties, where it's like, okay, as an independent voter, there could be one or two little things that sway that vote, because of the fact you really are kind of torn between the two. And when it came down to the Hillary debacle, if you will, when all that was on the media, and whether it was true or not, the media did a really great job of putting all that out there. But at the same time, the interesting thing is, the Trump campaign was already under investigation even before the election. And it just didn't make it out into the media, which it's still intriguing to me how that happened. But when it comes down to a trust issue, I feel like that swing vote, if you will, especially in a state like Ohio, or some of these other states, it's going to come down to, who do you trust and who do you feel is actually telling you the truth, and is going to be the best person to take that office of delivering what they say they're going to do. Understanding, of course, that gets difficult, once you get in, and, there's obviously things with Congress that would sometimes derail those campaign promises, as we all know. But ultimately, is this person that I'm going to give my vote to, can I trust that, okay, they're a good person and they're going to do what they say they're going to do, versus the discredit that the Trump campaign used quite brilliantly against Hillary, to get some of those independent swing votes. And it's, as you said, Mr. D, he's got his hardcore supporters that are going to vote for him regardless. And Mike, you made the statement. He said if he murders someone, they'll still vote for him, and maybe that's the case. But again, go ahead.
When you look at it, I think what the problem was is with Hillary when Trump, is the fact that you had the Bernie Sanders issues going on against Hillary. The investigations, the Comey issues. But I think one of the things that still amazes me, with all those negatives on Hillary, okay, she still got the popular vote. So it was the second time since 2000 that you had a president that was elected without winning the popular vote. The first one was George W., and then came, Trump. But I think what started to happen was a lot of people started saying, I'm not voting, or I'll vote for the third-party candidates. I may have lost my focus a little bit, but I still think that's going to be the issue. Who are they going to put up?
And I think, and once again, the whole recurring part of the show and this election is about, what does it mean for 2020? And it is so vitally important that people really have the leadership, and everyone has an understanding of what this means, because I think if you play like it's a base, right? I think Trump and the Republicans' biggest miscalculation will be that that we can rely on the base and we can do whatever it is that we want and we're good. And it's like, I think what Dom is basically saying, because once again, we are a bellwether here. So when you have a lot of independents basically going, listen, we didn't vote for Hillary because we knew she was a liar and she was a crook. And then because now we're all educated, because we're not just going to take something at face value, because you're right, we do think the media is fake in a lot of aspects. We think the politicians are fake in a lot of aspects. We're using our ears. We're using common sense and our knowledge to understand what's truth, what isn't truth, and what we think it is. And if we believe that Trump is lying, can you imagine the optics? They said that one of the biggest fears is that Trump himself will probably be okay because he's smart enough to realize and have that plausible deniability that there's a buffer in between him or a firewall. But they say the biggest concern they're going to have is Trump Jr. getting indicted. Now, if he gets indicted, regardless if they shut down that Russia probe, that case is going to go through. And then every evidence that they have collected will be out there for public record. And can you imagine the optics if a federal judge, a federal court, says this guy is guilty and Trump goes to try to pardon him? You're going to have a lot of independents going, and what Dom is saying, and don't take my word for it. These are what independents are saying. And if you don't believe me, go and ask independents what they would believe, what they would do if they knew that Trump basically, maybe the people around him, maybe he himself, maybe he didn't do anything directly illegal, but kind of lied about things, and he pardoned his son, who maybe did cross a line and lied about it. And I'm not saying he did. I'm just saying if there's a preponderance of evidence, the optics of that doesn't look awful. And for the very reason they didn't vote for Hillary, now they're going to have that same opinion of Trump. And if I were a Republican, if I were Mitch McConnell and all the leadership of the Republicans, when I'm thinking about what are we going to do, they have to listen to that. Just like the Democrats need to really go, listen, was this a referendum on Democrats anti-Trump, or is it more about anti-incumbents and change and compromise? Each side is going to... Yeah,
I mean, you got to go back to history. If you go back to history, with the Nixon pardon, okay, when Ford did the Nixon pardon and the disastrous impact that was on the Republican Party. I mean, Ford lost the presidential, lost the election over that. Republicans lost seats. There was a big backlash. And I think you're absolutely right. Is what's going to come down? What is actually going to come out? How's he going to react? And will he then be challenged by a moderate Republican? I mean, your mother and I, we're independents, but we love John Kasich. We really thought he was the most capable of all the people, but because he wasn't Lion Ted or all these others or going up into there, but he was telling you the way it was. This is what I'm going to do. People really weren't listening to him because they were enamored by Trump and his style, But, the one thing that always keeps in my mind, and I listen to it all the time, what was Giuliani said is, the truth isn't the truth.
Yep.
And I think we're living in that era.
Well, think about the people who run this country.
The caravans.
Well, think about Dad. Think what you said. Well, Dad, think about what you said on our show a couple weeks ago. This country is run by businessmen, basically. Let's be honest, businessmen and lawyers who really are all about what we can get away with. Remember when you were talking about that conversation about the pricing and what they can get away with? When the guy asks you, "Hey, what's 1 + 1?" You go 2. He goes, "No, it's whatever we want it to be." So it's like now all of a sudden people are getting hip to that, going, "Well, no, that is a lie. A lie is a lie," and people got called out on it. And that's the interesting thing, is that the everyday voter now is kind of going, no, that's kind of bullshit. No, I'm not buying that. It's just, you're right. Not only was this the most important election, this next 2 years will be the single most important decision that each side has to make. And what's going to be really fascinating is, what does the leadership do? I think the Democrats, I think they win or lose the election. I think with one big thing: do they allow Nancy Pelosi to continue to be the House Speaker? What she showed me,
Well,
she has no idea she has no plan. She besides anti-Trump, she has no plan. She's been outplayed every step along the way. And if they don't bring in some new leadership with new ideas and actually about compromise and actually legitimate new ideas, I think the Democrats are going to be screwed, because then I think they're going to play the anti-Trump card, because I think she really truly believes that's what the angle to play is. And it'll be interesting with all these young, a lot of these young new congressmen coming in. Are they basically going to go, no, we're done with this. No, we need new leadership.
Yeah. Thank you. Because your mother and I were talking about today. I said, I read in the paper where they're saying that there's already stirrings going on with the newly elected and all that, well, Nancy Pelosi being the speaker. There's some going on. And, she was hit hard for the minority. There was a big challenge to her minority leadership from the gentleman from Youngstown in the Democratic Party. My feeling is this: the Democratic leadership is in for one heck of a ride, because the people that have been elected are not what you call your traditional Democrats. They're moderates. You could almost call them moderate Republicans or moderate independents. I think there's going to be a lot of turmoil in the Democratic Party, just as the Tea Party caused a lot of stir in the Republican. You're seeing altogether different new Democratic candidates and people going to assume office that aren't going to just accept party rule. They're going to be very independent. You're going to have to convince them, So I'm really saying I can't wait to see what goes on for the next few years.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting, and this is where I want to kind of close things out, and Dom, I want to give you one of the last words on this one, because this is one of those where the culmination of this whole week, this that we're kind of covering here, is that what does it really mean? What is it, and going, what are people saying? What are we saying? Or what does it might mean, and what people need to do about it? So I want to go to, Dom, what is like the one thing that you want to hear and see, regardless of party affiliation? What is the one thing or the few things that you want to see and being said from the leadership, from the parties, that would make you really kind of go, okay, we're on the right track, versus what is the thing that you would probably see going, all right, this is really going to make me not want to vote for you or kind of even pay attention to this?
Cooperation. Instead of, clearly the country's, as we've talked and everyone's very aware of, it's so divided, and it's literally almost a 50-50 split. If you look at, every state and all that's happening, and as long as both parties continue to, alienate the other side and continue to make this separation, much, much larger. For me as an independent, I'm looking for the people within those parties, the leadership within those parties, who aren't going to be afraid to compromise and aren't, going to blindly just support whatever it may be because they're a Republican or because they're a Democrat, because there can be a conservative Democrat or a liberal Republican. I mean, they do exist. And I want that cooperation, that discourse to come out from an honest place. And if either party is continuing to harbor this, division and continuing to create misdirection, for me, that's something that, as I become a more educated voter, if I start seeing that stuff, it's gonna swing my vote one way or the other.
Compromise.
Yeah,
and
and whichever party's gonna step up to the plate and say enough's enough. This division, this is bullshit. 50% of the population in the United States doesn't like me, doesn't like us, doesn't like our party, doesn't like our policies. Okay, well then what do we need to do to get that 50% of the American population to maybe not feel that way and not be so alienated? And I think if one of the parties or even some of our candidates can start engaging the other side and actually hearing what that person has to say and making a responsible decision that isn't going to be good for just 50% of our population. That's just, it doesn't work. It just
And that's
doesn't work.
and that's what people need to hear loud and clear. You know, we got to figure out what country we want to be. Between like people like my dad, your guys' generation is getting that retirement and Social Security, Medicare. What country do we want to be? Do we want to take care of the people that help build this very country, or do we want to basically cut cost and reduce the care that they've freaking earned the right to have, all because they're allowing the lobbyists and everybody else to rape the system and spend money in all these ridiculous, stupid areas. Do we want a country where every other week we have mass shootings, where we don't even we're too busy talking about gun control and whether or not there should be guns or not, and Second Amendment, whether or not the government's going to take away our guns, and we're not having a conversation about why is it we're having all these shootings to begin with. I mean, to me, gun control is a downstream issue. Why don't we actually talk about the upstream issue of why so many people are being so riled up and taken into action and doing these heinous things? Soldiers, middle-aged people, kids. I mean, healthcare. And a drug. I mean, this country is at this crisis point where we have so many problems facing us, where if we don't fix it, it's not an issue of, oh, we'll kick the can. No, there's be no can to kick down the road because it fucking burns up in the fire that we've created. We have to compromise because the problems that are facing this country are so ridiculously huge that we need big solutions. And the only way you're going to get a big solution passed is by working together and actually legislating, not patches, not circumventing the legislative rules to earmark something and put patches on it. No, we are through that because that's not going to fix any problem. And I think the people maybe have woken up. The thing I fear most, though, is that this was an important election. It's only going to be followed by the next 2 years. To me, the 2020 election won't even matter if they fuck up the next 2 years with how they legislate. Because what's going to happen is that you got all these people riled up. You got all these people involved, excited that, hey, I'm going to make change. If all these people that voted for all this change and a compromise and work together, if all those people go into the swamp and basically start doing the same damn shit that everyone else is doing, now you've made people go, well, fuck it. Now it is pointless. It's hopeless. We got excited. All these new generation of voters, we were excited. We voted the right people in, young people. We voted out a lot of incumbents that have been there forever. And if they go in there and the same shit happens, now you've made people hopeless. You've made people go, there's no point. That is even more dangerous than where we were at before then. But I'm going to try to be optimistic. I know I'm like the jaded optimist. That I want to be optimistic. I want to be all idealistic about things. But I'm also okay. I'm also, as I've gotten older, I realize that things are, all right, it's not always going to be like that. But I am going to hold on to hope because I have to. As a clinician, as a radio host, as a father, I have to. I'm not going to be blindly idealistic, but I look at the show, these conversations, having my family with me on the show to help, to try to help change the world. That's what we do. Even if we're pissed off by it, even if we're frustrated by it, we keep trying still because that's the only thing that we have the ability to do. Just like if you bitch and moan and you don't vote, you don't have the really right to bitch and moan about anything. Well then, okay, if we see the problems that the world has and we're tired of having these, conversations over beer or in private or of the holidays about what's messed up and why isn't everyone having this conversation? Well, okay, now we're bringing these conversations out into the open. That's why I want, like my dad, the professor, that's why I want Flash Gordon and Dom on the show, because we are having these conversations. We have always said, if everyone was having this conversation, the world would be great. But then that's all it is. It stays at the house. It stays in the basement. It stays just over beers. No, this is our role. This is our job. Dad, you raised me to go, all right, like if you don't like something, change it. Think, use your head. And so, okay, this is what we do. Even if it looks like it's going to be tough. One person at a time, though. So, it was a big week. I'm optimistic about it. We just got to keep the conversation going. And, we'll do our part. So on that note, Dad, Dom, thank guys for coming again. Thanks for being part of it. And everybody have a good weekend. And on Monday, we will be back live. And this time I will be in Austin, Texas. We're going to take the Gray on the road. But we'll still have our good man, Domenic Flash Gordon in the studio. And then we'll have the bigwig, the honcho of the network, Chris Jordan, back with us again. So until then, everybody, I will check you guys later and keep it in the gray.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Gray Matters Radio with Michael DeVine. For more episodes and information, visit us online at graymattersradio.com. Join the conversation by following Gray Matters Radio on Facebook and Twitter. Gray Matters Radio is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. For more live episodes of this and other great shows, download the free HC Universal Network app at hcuniversalnetwork.com. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, remember, think about the gray.